is that Steven Adams is out for the season because his knee injury he suffered back in January has simply not healed to the point where he has this ability to go out and play. This was shocking, given that he has played in 2 preseason games, given that I made a tweet about how he looked great on his first dunk on a feed from Derrick Rose, but apparently that meant nothing because he is now out for the season. Just give me your quick thoughts on the feelings running through your head when you saw that news.
We talked a lot about the Grizzlies' deficiency coming into the season was rebounding. That will be more and more highlighted by the lack of Steven Adams going forward. You're going to give us some alternatives in just a second. The second thing I just want to talk about quickly is I think the front office needs to ask themselves a question about the management of this injury and really learn from it. Was there something that could have been prevented in the early parts of the process? Was there a certain therapeutic strategy that just didn't work with this sort of injury? Is there something to being 7 foot that we need to manage differently? I hope, Kleiman and the front office really take a look at and dissect what happened and learn from it going forward. But, as podcasters and as people who cover the team, our concern is, what do the Grizzlies do now? And that, I think, jumps us into our Royal Decree, King. Why don't you hit us with your Royal Decree on the Steven Adams situation?
Yeah, and before the Royal Decree, we got to hear that gavel of justice. It is a sad Royal Decree. This is the kind of Royal Decree that I imagine a king would make in the wake of a great tragedy in his kingdom. But in our Grizzlies' kingdom, that great tragedy is the Steven Adams injury. My Royal Decree is that the Grizzlies should not make a decision based solely on this year. What I mean is, if the Grizzlies think, as many of their fans seem to based on Twitter, that they need to go and make a short-sighted move to add center depth right now that involves giving up significant future assets, that's a mistake if you're only thinking about it in the context of this year. However, the flip side of that Royal Decree is a big move in the wake of the Steven Adams injury might still be wise because it's not just about next year. This injury, more than anything, shows us that Steven Adams is probably not your long-term solution at center. And that pains me to say because I love Steven Adams. I love what he does for this team. He has been an underratedly massive part of everything the Grizzlies have done in the previous 2 seasons. But the truth is, he's a 30-year-old center with now a significant knee injury that's going to have held him out for over a year and a half. You can't count on him ever being the same player. And at this point, your core is in ready to win now mode. And so maybe you don't make a decision for this year, but I still think the Grizzlies need to be exploring options that are going to shore up their long-term center depth. I can provide some of those options in a second, but Karna, what do you just think about that idea that Steven Adams may not be the Grizzlies' long-term answer at center?
I think the question that GMs in all sports are asking themselves is, are we looking for a championship or a championship window? And I think that will be interesting for the front office to really debate. And the Steven Adams move is only a microcosm of the moves that they need to make to really make that decision. Are you going to go all in and bargain your future and give up maybe a guy like Zaire Williams for a high-end center without knowing what a guy can be? That's a question they need to ask themselves. In my opinion, you're looking for a championship window. I think we're seeing dynasties in other sports kind of emerge. And I think I would rather be a fan of those teams, the dynasty teams, than a team that won one championship and then faded to irrelevance. So I'm hoping they make a smart long-term move. I'm with you.
Yeah, and this Royal Decree is a bit confusing. Let me clarify to just say the Grizzlies should not go and sign a center that is also aging and also has knee issues. Wink, wink, hint, hint. That's something we're going to talk about in a second. Because they want to win this year. This year's probably not your year anyway, as much as we love our 2023-2024 Memphis Grizzlies. The West is absolutely stacked right now. you've got a ton of teams across the NBA who are all in thinking this is their year, and they may only have one or two more after this. Some teams that come to mind very quickly are the Lakers and the Bucks. Just think about what the Lakers, the Bucks, you maybe even could add the Suns, are going to look like 2 or 3 years from now. Unless they make dramatic changes to what they have now, they won't be championship contenders. The Grizzlies still can be. They just need to start making decisions at center based on maximizing this window. So I completely agree with what you're saying there. Yes, one championship would transform Memphis. So one championship would be amazing. But going all in for nothing close to a guarantee. In fact, going all in a move that would make the Grizzlies maybe like the 5th or 6th favorite for the title would be unwise unless it's something that's also going to help you down the line. So, some ideas that I have. First of all, if you're going to make a big trade, people forget you have to give something up. Even with the exceptions the Grizzlies have, they're still going to have to give up assets even beyond draft picks. So, one of the best fits in the NBA at center for the Grizzlies, I believe to be New York Knicks center Mitchell Robinson. He does a lot of the things that Steven Adams does, and he's much younger. He was 14th in the NBA last year with 9.4 rebounds per game, 6th in the NBA with 1.8 blocks per game. He's a hard screen setter, a great roller. He's much more athletic than Steven at this point as a lob threat, would fit great next to Ja. Now, what would the Knicks possibly want for him, considering they see him as a foundational piece? Well, they do have Isaiah Hartenstein, and they do need three-point shooting. They were 24th in the NBA in three-point shooting last year. If you dangled Luke Kennard and a first-round pick in front of the Knicks, I think they would be interested in giving the Grizzlies Mitchell Robinson. What do you think about that deal for both sides, Karna?
I mean, again, I don't hate it. I hate giving up a first-round pick. And I hate giving up Luke Kennard, especially since we considered spacing to be an issue. But together and in the position that we're in, we have a big hole to fill. And Mitchell Robinson does that. I don't hate the deal combined. I hate losing those two assets kind of on their own. But for what we're getting back, I think it makes sense. Is it the most optimal move? I think there's people that can provide similar value at a cheaper kind of price point for what we're willing to give up. And I think you're about to get into those.
Yeah, and another option here is Robinson's backup, Isaiah Hartenstein, who I just mentioned.
Yeah.
In that case, and I just saw Sam Quinn of CBS Sports say he doesn't think the Knicks have any interest in moving Hartenstein, so this is probably a moot point. But for Hartenstein, a backup, starting level center, but still a backup, maybe you could get it done with like Roddy, Laravia, or Conchar, plus like Kenny. So 2 players who are fringe rotation guys for you, and a pick. Isaiah Hartenstein, in my mind, is not worth a first-round pick, even for the help he could do for you next year. And one thing to keep in mind between Hartenstein and Robinson is that Robinson is a much more long-term option. He is locked up for the next 3 years at a pretty reasonable salary for the value that he gives you. Meanwhile, Hartenstein will be an unrestricted free agent next summer, so that's the kind of short-term solution I don't think the Grizzlies would pursue. You're going to be better off giving up more to get Robinson than you would to get a stopgap like Hartenstein. Would you ready to hear another more realistic, smaller move?
Yeah, I'm ready. I got one guy that I want to throw out at the end here. I just want to get your reaction to the trading for this guy.
Yeah, so we're going to do trade candidates first, and then we'll get into some guys the Grizzlies could sign and how the mechanisms for how they could do that. But a guy who's been thrown around that could be very cheap for the Grizzlies would be Andre Drummond of the Chicago Bulls, right down the road at the United Center. Because of the Grizzlies traded player exception from the Dillon Brooks sign and trade, they could get Andre Drummond for 2 second-round picks, which, by the way, is something the Grizzlies do not have in abundance. From my count, they only have their 2026 and 2030 second-round picks. Maybe you can throw in one of your meaningless pick swaps. But I would have to think that with the Bulls where they are, they might be willing to do that deal for just 2 second-round picks. They are over the luxury tax right now and have never paid the luxury tax historically. So they might do that just for salary dump. Now, that is the short-term solution that I was just saying we should not do. But in this case, with it not costing you much, do you think getting Drummond would make sense?
I look, the thing about Andre Drummond is, and you already mentioned it, he's older, right? Like he's been in the league for a while, which is not a bad thing. I don't think it ever hurts to add a veteran presence into the locker room, especially this one.
Maybe not a winning presence, though. I mean, he's never really been a part of a successful team.
I mean, it's not his fault that he went to Detroit. That's not on him.
Facts.
So, yeah, I mean, is it the best move? No. Do I think he would add value and step into that hole? Yes. But again, from a perspective of giving up 2 second-round picks, which, again, are depth builders for us, I wouldn't love the move, but I would understand it from the front office perspective, right? And he does add now, current athleticism behind, but Jaren Jackson Jr. and him are a dynamic defensive duo and defend the rim pretty decently, it seems like. So I would be happy to see some of that, and his defensive rebounding numbers are pretty good. At this point, anyone who can grab a rebound is pretty much welcome on the Grizzlies roster. So, I don't know if you get our desperation here, fans, but we need just somebody. If you are down at East Porta on Poplar and you want to try out and you can box someone out, go down to the FedEx Forum. I'm sure they would love to have you.
I kind of think you might need to drive down to the end and give it a try. I've seen you do some work on the boards.
Yeah, I mean, my box shot game is pretty nasty. I won't lie, but I don't know if I just have a big fear of ending up on YouTube with LeBron James dunking on me, which would be most likely
real fair.
Yeah, which would most likely be the first thing that happens if I stepped on the NBA floor.
Yeah, and why we're saying this is such a desperation move, the Grizzlies, after being probably the best rebounding team in the NBA with Steven Adams, dropped to 22nd in defensive rebounding percentage since his injury, 16th in offensive rebounding percentage. In other words, they were below average in the NBA in both cleaning up the defensive boards and also creating second chance opportunities. For a team that struggles at half court offense, those second chance opportunities are massive. And for a team that's going to have to win with their defense, if you can't finish a defensive possession by grabbing the boards, then your defensive numbers are going to drop as well, which is exactly what happened once Steven got hurt last year. The Grizzlies went from first in defensive rating to ninth. And I don't think the Grizzlies can expect to have a top 3 NBA defense if they don't get some help on the boards. One thing about Andre Drummond, who we just mentioned, last year he averaged a career low 6.6 rebounds per game in 12.7 minutes per game. That's basically what Jaren averages in over double the minutes. Jaren is saying he's got to be better, and I think he will be, but suffice to say, Andre Drummond provides exactly what you need for very cheap. As far as short-term moves, that is one I would be willing to do for the cost of a couple second-round picks.
And I'm just going to caveat something for you if we ever get, a comment on this. We're not looking to replace Steven Adams holistically. I don't know if that's possible to do.
Yeah.
So just a caveat here is we're looking to replace specifically that rebounding / defensive part of his game. The pick and roll, the chemistry with Ja, that's not going to just come overnight. That's going to take time for whoever steps into that role. And that's something that just Grizzlies fan, I would encourage you to not, whoever steps into that role, be like, oh, well, this isn't Steven Adams. Well, yeah, he's not supposed to be Steven Adams, right? Steven Adams, I think we underrate him, and the NBA media does as well, is a great NBA center.
Yeah, and
so just keep that in mind.
When I talk about a guy like Andre Drummond, I'm saying somebody who can come in and play 10 to 15 minutes per game and provide some depth in your front court, provide you some options, maybe for a starting job when you're facing a huge guy like Anthony Davis in the playoffs. But your hope would be that by the playoffs, maybe Brandon Clark's healthy, maybe as we'll talk about later, other options have entered the table, or maybe some of your young guys like Santi, Xavier. I'm not going to say Kinney because I haven't seen the evidence, but Kinney have gotten to the point where they're playable, and you don't need a guy like Drummond. He's a stopgap to get you there, but one that's not going to cost you too much. So let's talk about one that would cost the Grizzlies a lot that I've seen thrown around and who is basically the antithesis of my royal decree, and that is Robert Williams III in Portland. I saw you laughing, Karna, but this is probably the one I've seen the most on like fake trades. What would you think about Robert Williams in Memphis?
Way too expensive. No, the reason I was laughing is because you just were like, this is the antithesis of everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, it is.
But and I would encourage, I hope you all watch other sports other than the Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies aren't the only team that you watch.
I don't know. I mean, I actually think that putting yourself in the position of having one sports team that you live and die by is a really healthy place to be emotionally.
Yeah.
You're not setting
Texas
yourself up for
football's
any kind of
never
breakdown.
let me down. No, look, my argument there is that is a win now move, right? He is a young player, but you are bargaining a lot of your future pieces and future picks for you would just have to think, for a guy who could add a ton of value right now and will add a ton of value to the franchise. But just like the Suns have reckoned with, they're in a win now mode. The question is, are we in a win now mode? I think for considering all the pieces that we have and where we stand in the West, I think it would be foolish to give what Robert Williams' asking price is. I think it would be foolish to give that up. But you let me know. Maybe you can finagle something. Get yourself a front office job right now.
So, if you are asking for Robert Williams, you are saying the Grizzlies need to make a move that is going to help them at center right now. And yes, he's a young player, so maybe he's going to help them down the line as well. But that right now part is what's worrisome given the price that you're going to have to pay. Most likely, a trade for Robert Williams involves giving up Brandon Clark, who will most likely miss this season at least until the very end. And in my opinion, with Robert Williams, you're rolling the dice on a player who's just as risky as Steven Adams. Robert Williams has averaged 42 games played per season. He only played 35 games last year on a contending Celtics team that really needed his front court presence. Yes, he had an incredible 2022 playoff run. It was a huge part of them making the finals. Maybe we want a little reunion with Marcus Smart, but I'll take my chances with BC coming back and helping you next year and not try to push the chips in for somebody who will likely help you more this year, but is not likely to help you beyond, just given the health risks. And if the Blazers were willing to take Steven Adams for Robert Williams and a first-round pick, maybe I'm interested now, but I don't know what interest they would have in that, given that Steven doesn't fit with their timeline.
Blazers are going to be asking for a ton of picks.
Yeah,
it'd be foolish of them not to, and that's capital that. And this is a finance guy in me. It's just like I don't know what that asset can be, so I'm really, really wary to give that asset up.
Yeah.
And it just like you were saying, it's a win now move. I think the only devil's advocate point that you have here is like, yeah, he's had some injuries, but he's also 26.
Yeah, he's young.
And like maybe the training staff can work with him and to increase the longevity of his career. Both
I don't
within
trust our
the
training
season.
staff at all, just given the results we've seen.
I don't disagree, but both within the season and in the future timeline. So, look, this is again a little too expensive, I think, for us. I think the asking price is a little too high. I think there's cheaper options that do similar things, but if we get Robert Williams, and this is what I'll say, is there a better defensive front court?
No, I mean if
no,
he
right?
and Jaren are healthy next to each other, that's
absolutely
incredible.
Not. Like
he ain't
how
scoring on the rim.
Yeah, how do you score in the paint? Like
yeah. I like Time Lord as a player. He's incredibly fun to watch, and his athleticism next to Ja would be very fun as well. His ability to catch those lobs in a way that even Steven couldn't really do. But what I'm saying as far as my hesitation with him is both he and Steven Adams and Brandon Clark, given the severity of his injury, are all question marks whether they are going to be long-term solutions as, a starting or even a bench rotation member in the front court. So if I'm going to take that risk, I'll take it with the person that I already have on the roster in Brandon Clark and save my picks.
Okay.
Whereas for somebody like Mitchell Robinson, whose injury history is not nearly as extensive, I'm a little more willing to put some assets in because there's not as much risk and he is equally as good a fit in my mind. So to recap, Karna, we said maybe you give up one of our favorite players, 6th Man of the Year candidate Luke Kennard, and a first-round pick to the Knicks for Mitchell Robinson. You're not doing that for this year. You're doing that because he can fill the Steven Adams void for years to come. If you're just looking for something now that's not going to cost too much, let's call up Chicago, see if they'll take a couple second-round picks. If Grizzlies, if you want to send me to barter at the United Center, I mean, I'm available. I would be happy to help in that way. But we're staying away from the Robert Williams III move for the injury risk, for the fact that it's a little too focused on now when you have guys who can help you for the next few seasons. We're going to hope that the training staff is not going to bungle the Brandon Clark situation as badly as they bungled the Steven Adams one, and that he's going to be an effective player. But
I have
any other trades?
One guy I just want to quickly run by you.
Yeah.
He's a Sixers backup center.
Okay.
And it's a guy that I talked about last year. I thought it would be interesting to bring him in. What do you think about bringing in 25-year-old Mo Bamba?
Ooh, wow.
They're only paying him $2 million. So
yeah.
the issue here is that he's the sole backup to Joel Embiid, a guy who has had injuries and will almost certainly not play 82 games.
Yeah.
So we would have to give them something in return or a 3-team trade where they fill that gap. And honestly, it is a kind of a win now move, but you're investing in a guy that's like 25. Hopefully you don't have to give up that much on the draft capital, but you do have to find a team that's willing to give up a big man back to the 76ers because they cannot exist without. They're just not primed for a small ball lineup either without Joel Embiid.
My thing is, I don't think that is a win now mode. I think this is a much lower cost, but admittedly also lower ceiling version of the Mitchell Robinson deal, where yes, it's going to help you this year, but he's a guy who can help you potentially for years to come. He did average 8.1 rebounds per game in 26 minutes with the Magic in 2021-2022. He averages 5.8 rebounds per his career in 18 minutes. Let's not compare that on a per minute basis to Jaren because it's not going to look pretty. On the flip side, his career defensive rating is not great at 107.1. So he was playing on bad Magic's teams. I don't think we can completely blame it on him. But on a Lakers team that needed depth, he still wasn't getting that much time. So it seems like the promise there hasn't delivered. I wouldn't hate it just for the fact that that's not a push your chips in for this year. That's a push your chips in for somebody who maybe, if everything strikes right, could be a part of your long-term plans.
Bigger thing. Yeah.
He is only on a 1-year deal. So that is something to consider. You have to know that you could probably re-sign him.
Yeah, and I think we could. But 35.9% 3-point for the career.
He's got that in the back. We have seen
my man is stretching the floor. So I don't know. It's an interesting fit. I think it would be an interesting fit for that. You know, we talked to the Sixers. You have to give something up.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You have to give something important up. You can't get away with that deal because of how important Mo Bamba is to that organization right now. Well, right?
They have Joel Embiid, obviously. The reigning MVP. They have Paul Reed, who's a really solid backup center, and if they didn't need him because of Embiid's injury history, I would say let's call about him as well. They have Montrezl Harrell, who they just waived actually, so I guess they don't have Montrezl Harrell. I don't know what I'm talking about. It's been a long couple days, but by the fact that they waived Montrezl Harrell, to me that's signaling that they're okay with their front court right now. I don't know if they're okay because they think Mo Bamba's a part of that rotation or if they don't really have a place in the rotation for him. It's worth a call at the right price. We're talking swapping like Kenny and a pick. Kenny and a second rounder. I doubt that's going to get the job done. I haven't really explored that fake trade, but I like the idea because he would potentially be another young piece to add. Carter, I'm now going to talk about some guys you could theoretically sign, current free agents. And if this list is a bit depressing, please forgive me. It's all that is available out there. Newsflash, this is not NBA free agency period anymore. Guys who aren't on rosters for a reason, but here are some guys who the Grizzlies could theoretically sign if they opened up a roster spot, which they can starting in Game 6 once Ja can be added to the suspended list. Okay? First, Bismarck Biyombo. Last saw him on the Phoenix Suns. Was a pretty big part of their rotation a couple years ago. Dwayne Dedman, Wenyen Gabriel, Gorgie Jang, Nerlens Noel, Kim Birch, who was just waived by the Spurs, Tony Bradley, who was just waived by the Mavs, which, given their struggles in the front court, I think that tells you all you need to know. But do any of those names stick out to you as somebody the Grizzlies should consider adding for that Game 6 to 25 window?
Nerlens Noel, I guess. I don't. He's 6'10". He has a good defensive promise. He's only 29. I'm struggling, brother. I'm struggling here. He could add value. I think Nerlens Noel is the one. If I was just looking at that list, and I don't have the advanced stats in front of me and all the stats in general, I'm going with Nerlens Noel just based off of what I've seen in the past. Okay. Is there anyone? Am I tripping? Or also Dwight Howard's available? I don't know if you've seen his for a reason. I don't know if you see his social media post, but he's kind of lit on TikTok. So
he's going to end up recruiting Ja to play in China. We do not need those two close to each other. Okay. My answer would be Biyombo, and spoiler alert, into this very long and admittedly rambling segment about what the heck the Grizzlies can do about the Steven Adams hole, I'm going to be talking about Biyombo a little bit. He averaged over 4 rebounds per game and 14 minutes per game for the Suns the last 2 seasons. And a couple years ago, he legitimately had people wondering if he was better than Ayton. There were serious conversations going about how the Suns didn't really need DeAndre Ayton. He was out injured and Biyombo filled in for him because of the job he was doing, the energy he was providing. And I think that was probably a little bit of a spoiler at the chemistry issues that ended up kicking Ayton out the door. But that's what I would do. Karno, you ready for my final thought on this? What the Grizzlies should do in total?
I'm ready.
The Grizzlies should sign Bismarck Biyombo starting in Game 6 once they can move Ja to that suspended player list. And then do a little trade deadline hunting. Because you just know there are going to be some sellers with center depth at the deadline.
Yeah.
Some names I'd watch out for. Jakob Poeltl. The Raptors are very committed to a core that doesn't seem to make sense. They did re-sign Poeltl, which didn't make a lot of sense at the time, but although he seems to be Ja's favorite target to dunk on, he also would be a pretty great fit for the Grizzlies. Miles Turner in Indiana. I think Indiana's going to be pretty good, but if they struggle, and even if he's just not as big a part of what they're doing with Halliburton healthy, then maybe he's on the block. He seems to be perpetually so. Clint Capella. The Hawks are set to be an above luxury tax team. That's not an above luxury tax market. They might want to shed salary and open up room for Onyeka Okongwu. Then we just talked about Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein for the Knicks. If they're not having a great season, or if one of those guys has emerged and the other one fallen off, maybe you can get them for cheap. Wendell Carter for the Magic. With the amount of front court talent they have, he seems like a guy who could get a little bit lost. So all those guys, probably too expensive now, but ask in February and it might be a possibility. Any of those guys that stick out as who would be a particularly good fit.
Yeah, you said Clint Capella and I got a little excited. Dude, if we got you get Clint Capella, that how do you score on that front court?
And think about the lobs. Think about the lobs.
Yeah, I don't even want to, dude, because it's not happening. Nothing good happens to me on that scale.
It's not impossible though. Like the
It's
Hawks
not.
have
It's
reason to want the salary dump.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything the Grizzlies can really offer them that would be interesting from a player perspective. Like the Hawks have a pretty solid roster. They might be interested in Brandon Clark as kind of a fill-in for John Collins now that they sent him packing. But if they're looking to get rid of Clint Capella, the Grizzlies should absolutely be picking up the phone and calling.
Agreed.